So my project is on Greek sculpture through ancient Greece's three main periods. We're going to talk about the Archaic period and the pottery throughout, the Kairos, the Kore, the Classical period and the three goddesses and Zeus of Artemision or Poseidon, the Hellenistic period, and the dying Goal and Lacuna and his two sons. This topic was one of my favorites that we read about throughout the book. I love anything about ancient Greece. In high school, I did a very long research paper about Greek mythology just because it was interesting. So here we go. The Archaic period spanned from 650 to 500 BCE. It preceded the Dark Age, which we don't really know a lot about. There's not a lot left over from that time. The Archaic period began when the Persians were ejected from Greece. A lot of really vast changes happened in the Archaic period, such as the language, society, politics, but mostly the art and architecture. It had a very rigid, symmetrical style that was really heavily inspired by ancient Egypt and Persia. You can really see, especially in these pieces, they're very, at least to me, they look very Egyptian. Everything from the hairstyles to the way that the body looks, it's not lifelike. It's very godly, I guess. Archaic pottery was one of the first and I think most important pieces or types of art for the ancient Greeks. It was sort of a good starting point for them, but also it was used a lot in day-to-day life. They used it for everything from vases to water jugs to decorations for their homes. The black figure pottery was the first and main way to paint/decorate the pottery. They sort of had this figured out by 600 BCE. Obviously, it was named because the figures here are black and the background is red. They did it by applying the black and painting the figures layer by layer, and then they would fire it in. It would create different shades of black, and every piece was really, really unique and different. After that, they came up with a more advanced, much more difficult way to decorate the pottery, which was the red figure, as you see here. This type, they outlined the figures with the black glaze and painted the background black instead of the figure. It gave them the opportunity to create a lot more detail, to make things more lifelike, to have a brighter, more colorful look for the pottery. It gave them more freedom to create things to be a lot more realistic, I guess. Archaic sculpture was mostly one of these two styles. It was either a Kairos, which is a freestanding male nude, or a Kore, which was sort of the female version of the Kairos. The Kairos was always very symmetric. You usually found them as a grave marker or standing outside of temples. As the Archaic period went on, obviously it became a lot more relaxed and realistic looking. They sort of grew from looking just like a Egyptian, or like the first picture that I showed earlier, inspired piece of sculpture, to what we see later, which you'll see in the Classical period, just looked more human-like. The female version of the Kairos was the Kore, and they were generally a lot less stiff-looking. They were always clothed, which I think probably gave it a less stiff look. They were draped, with the clothing. They created softer lines and more gentle look. They also always had a little smile, made their faces look more animated and more human-like, which I read was generally called the archaic smile. The classical period was from 500 BCE to 323 BCE. It began when Greece overcame a really big Persian invasion, and it was sort of Athens' golden age. It was the most well documented, and like I said earlier, the art started off super rigid, and you can see if you look at a timeline from the beginning of the archaic period to the end of the classical period, it increasingly became more lifelike. It's a really cool evolution to see. In this time, a lot of the big sculptures that we saw were in temples, and the two biggest sculptural elements were the pedimental sculpture and the frieze. The pedimental sculpture generally rested on a ledge in a temple, and my favorite of these is the three goddesses. I read that the pedimental sculpture was generally thought to be like the essence of Greek sculpture. That is what you think of when you think of Greek sculpture. The three goddesses were supposed to be witness to Athena's birth. And something that the book said that I thought was pretty perfect and hit the nail right on the head was the garments that they're wearing really define them as individual pieces and really show which goddess is which, but then it also draws them all together and makes them blend really well. It's just a beautiful piece. The detail and the lifelikeness of the bodies kind of makes it my favorite, or one of my favorites that I put in this project. Another piece that is really famous from this time is the Zeus of Artemission, or Poseidon. Generally, the freestanding sculptures were either god in human form or very heroic and athletic men. This one in particular was one of the few bronze statues that survived the classical period. It's sort of the epitome of the freestanding classical period sculptures. So next we have the Hellenistic period, which went from 323 BCE to 31 BCE. It began with the death of Alexander the Great, which was a really big moment for ancient Greece. He preceded his father, and he sort of decided to take over, or tried to take over, Persia and Egypt, which were some of the greatest empires of that time, and he didn't lose a battle. He brought their territories and their resources completely under his rule, and he had control over everything. He ended up dying of a fever, and all of his empire was divided into 3 kingdoms, which adopted a monarch-style government. So they pretty much ended up running sort of like Persia previously did. The Hellenistic art, though, was really aimed at ordinary, everyday people. It was aimed to look like ordinary, everyday people. And it was really created to emotionally impact the viewer, the person who saw it. 2 pieces that I think really resemble that are the Dying Gull, which one of the Hellenistic rulers made to honor his opponents in battle. This one I think is really interesting. It's of a man who killed himself with his own sword as a resignation in battle, which was thought to be very heroic, I guess. This other one over here is my personal favorite from my project. It's Laocoon and his 2 sons. And I think this one's really amazing. It's of a Trojan priest and his two sons being attacked by serpents. And I think it's one of the most detailed, most lifelike ones that I've come across. You can really see everything from the emotion and the fear and despair to the physical fight and struggle that's going on. Everything from the way that their bodies are standing. He's unwrapping the snake from around his foot, and to the muscle tone and the struggle you can see was just so much detail was paid to this piece. So it's my personal favorite that I've come across about or and in ancient Greek sculptures. So that's my project. Thank you.